Hi, it's Katrina. My friend David is going to be helping me out with the voiceover today, so everyone give him a warm welcome.
Number 10. The terrible Thennington Triangle. The Thennington Triangle is an area of southwestern Vermont in which a number of people vanished between the years of 1945 and 1950. To this day, no one really knows what happened to the 5 people who disappeared. Among the mysteriously vanished are Middle Rivers in 1945, Paula Weldon in 1946, James Tedford in 1949, and Paul Jeffson and Frida Langer in 1950. While it's true that there are plenty of disappearances that are never solved, the fact that all 5 of them vanished in the same region and were never found is beyond coincidence. Middle Rivers disappeared while on a hunting trip. He was guiding a group of hunters when he got a little bit ahead of them and was never seen again. People searched high and low, but the only thing that they found was a single rifle cartridge sitting in a stream. About a year later, Paula Weldon set out for a hike. She was seen by an elderly couple about 100 yards behind her, but after she went around a corner in the trail, she seemingly vanished into thin air. A $5,000 reward was put forth by the FBI, but not a single scrap of evidence was ever discovered. James Tedford was the third one to disappear, approximately 3 years after Paula vanished. He was visiting relatives and then went to catch a local bus home. Witnesses saw him get on the bus, but somewhere on his way to Bennington, he disappeared. His belongings were still on the luggage rack when the bus driver stopped to search the bus. James had also seemingly vanished into thin air. The stories of the missing continue in this vein, with the disappearance of 8-year-old Paul Jeffson, who was alone in his mother's truck for an hour before he vanished. Frida Langer disappeared just 16 days after Paul. Langer, who was 53, went missing while on a camping trip. Her body, unlike the others, was eventually found. Number 9. The body on Summerton Beach. In Adelaide, South Australia, a body was discovered on the beach in December of 1948. To this day, nobody knows who this person was, how he died, or where he came from. All we know is that his body turned up on Summerton Beach at about 7 o'clock in the evening on a Tuesday. A couple was strolling down the beach when they found the dead man, his head propped against a seawall, legs outstretched and motionless. He was dressed in a suit, he had new shoes on, and the couple just assumed he was asleep. This was despite the fact that his face was swarmed by bugs. It wasn't until the following morning that people realized the man leaning against the seawall was dead. He was transported to the nearest hospital, and the doctors put his time of death at somewhere around 2 o'clock in the morning. This means that when the people saw him at the beach the night before, he was still alive. Doctors believe he died from heart failure, brought on by some kind of poison. In his pockets, doctors found a pack of gum, some matches, cigarettes, no cash, and no ID. His clothes didn't even have tags on them. They had all been neatly snipped off. One of his trouser pockets had been repaired with orange thread, which doctors said they found very unusual. In his belly, doctors discovered his last meal and a quantity of blood. Everything pointed to poisoning, but there were some other strange things too, such as the fact that he was built like an athlete or bodybuilder, a physique which in the 1940s was very strange. In the end, the police could not figure out how he had gotten to the beach. They didn't even know if he was Australian, and over 70 years later, he's remained nameless. Number 8. Mystery of the Cecil Hotel. The Cecil Hotel has been operating in Los Angeles for just about 100 years. During their century of business, they have developed a rather grisly reputation, as the Cecil Hotel has been marked by death. The Cecil Hotel rose to fame in 2013 because of the disappearance of Eliza Lamb, the Canadian college student who vanished and whose case was never really solved. For those unfamiliar with the case, Eliza was seen on surveillance video in an elevator in the hotel, acting extremely strange. She vanished without a trace and was later discovered naked in the water tank on the hotel roof. To this day, nobody has any clue what happened to her, or even really what she was doing in Los Angeles. But Eliza Lamb was only the most recent victim of the hotel. The first death here took place 2 years after it opened, and in the 1960s a retired woman was discovered dead in her room after being assaulted and stabbed. Her murder was also never solved. In 1985, the serial killer Richard Ramirez was a resident of the hotel. While not proven, it's believed that Ramirez, known largely as the Night Stalker, committed several of his crimes while staying at the hotel. The moral of the story here is that even though Eliza is the most famous unsolved disappearance of the Cecil Hotel, this place has a long and disturbing history of deaths and vanishings. So much so that it has been the inspiration for numerous horror films and TV shows, including American Horror Story Hotel in 2015. Number 7. The bombing of Wall Street in 1920. Wall Street was bombed on September 16, 1920. Up until the devastating attacks of 9/11, this was the worst terrorist attack on US soil. 101 years later, the truth about who bombed Wall Street is still a total mystery. Here's how the bombing went down. The lunch rush had just started. There was a nondescript man driving a horse and cart up the street in front of the USSA office and across from the JP Morgan building. The driver got off the cart and walked innocently into the crowd of businessmen and other city folk going about their business and heading away for lunch. Minutes later, the cart exploded in a massive boil of fire and metal fragments, killing over 30 people and injuring roughly 300. It was a massive disaster with horrific carnage. But who is responsible? Sadly, we don't know, and probably never will. Everyone assumed it was an act of intentional terrorism, likely by an Italian anarchist group. But because this was the 1920s, there wasn't really any way to collect forensic evidence. Crews cleaned up the damage through the night, taking away anything that could have been used to identify the perpetrator. By the next morning, Wall Street was bustling, as if nothing had happened, except that some of the workers were bandaged up, and life carried on. Who caused this devastating explosion? To this day, it is still a mystery. Number 6. The death of JonBenet Ramsey. On the morning after Christmas 1996, 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey was found dead. The young girl's parents had actually thought she was kidnapped during the night. Her mother, Patsy Ramsey, called 911 just before 6 o'clock in the morning, saying that she had found a ransom note at the bottom of her stairs. The note said that if the parents phoned the authorities, the young girl would be killed. They were asking for approximately $118,000. The note also said that the parents would be receiving a phone call from the kidnapper in the morning. Naturally, the parents did not listen to the demand letter and instead called the police. But a lot of things happened in those first few hours, such as friends of the family coming for moral support and contaminating the entire house. The police didn't secure the scene at all, and after a few hours, most of the police just simply left. And then things got bad. John Ramsey, the girl's father, went to look in the basement for any potential clues when he found JonBenet's dead body down there. She hadn't been kidnapped at all. She had been dead in the basement the whole time. She had her hands tied over her head, tape over her mouth, and she wasn't breathing. The cause of death turned out to be strangulation with a string wrapped around a piece from a paintbrush. The child also suffered a massive skull fracture and shocks from a stun gun. It was horrific, and sadly, the police believed the parents were involved. But this could never be proven. And all these years later, we still have no idea who killed the girl, or how they got in and out of the basement while committing a murder without being noticed. What do you think happened here? Was the father responsible for his daughter's death, or was this a bizarre case of kidnapping gone wrong? Let me know your theories in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Number 5. The Twin Peaks Murder. If anyone has ever seen the TV series Twin Peaks, you may be interested to know that the show was based on an unsolved homicide from 1908. It happened in New York, with 20-year-old Hazel Drew being brutally killed under dubious circumstances. Her body was discovered floating in a pond on July 11th, 4 days after she was killed. The more the investigators looked into the killing, the more confusing the whole case became. Drew was from a poor family but had been working as a domestic servant for 3 wealthy and important men in the city. These were connected people, politically speaking. 2 of them had run for mayor and one of them was an engineer for the city. But just days before she died, Drew quit her job unexpectedly. It seemed like her murder may have had something to do with her work. But more weird stuff kept coming out. The police discovered letters sent to her from various male friends. One of these friends even apologized in the letter he wrote for bruising her wrists. It also turned out she had been in a violent altercation with another boyfriend named Henry. But in the end, there were too many suspects and too many contradictions. Police were never able to make an arrest or solve the case of who murdered Hazel Drew. Number 4. The Hinterkaifeck Murders. In the case of the Hinterkaifeck murders, over 100 suspects have been interviewed, and yet an official suspect has never been named, even after nearly a century of investigating. The murders happened in March of 1922. Farmer Andreas Gruber noticed footsteps outside his home leading from the woods to his place, but not going back. It was chilling, to say the least. This was 1922 in rural Germany. Things were quiet and safe, but not for Andreas Gruber and his family. Somebody had snuck onto his property, and on March 31st, this unidentified person, or even persons, lured each family member outside to their death. Andreas, his wife Cecilia, his daughters Victoria and his granddaughter Cecilia were lured one by one to the barn outside and slaughtered with a pickaxe. The family maid and Andreas's grandson Josef were massacred in the home where they slept in their beds. It wouldn't be until April 4th, nearly a week later, that a group of townspeople stopped by the farm to see why the kids hadn't showed up for school in a few days. Nobody ever found out who murdered this entire family. The Munich police interviewed suspects as recently as 1986, but frustratingly, no culprit has been captured. The only reason we know about the footprints is that Andreas had complained to his neighbor about them. He had even complained about hearing footsteps in the attic. He also said that the keys to the tool shed were missing, and that he found a newspaper inside his house that none of his family members had purchased. Number 3. The Christmas Tree Sinking. Just about 11 decades ago, the Christmas tree ship sank in Lake Michigan. The schooner was captained by a guy nicknamed Captain Santa. It had been filled with a cargo of Christmas trees on its way to Chicago, but met a horrifying storm while moving across the lake. In the final moments that the ship was still upright, the crew threw out the port anchor, hoping that it would help combat the wind. This is what archaeologists found when they investigated the shipwreck. But there is still a mystery about how the ship sank. According to the National Archives, a powerboat saw the ship in distress and went to intercept, but when they reached the approximate location of the ship, it had completely vanished. For decades, nobody could figure out what happened in such a short time for the entire ship to go beneath the waves. It was as if the water just opened up and swallowed it. Archaeologists later decided that the ship had been carrying too many Christmas trees. When the crew threw the anchor, it caused a chain reaction that yanked the vessel down to the bottom of the lake so hard that it crashed into the lake bed like a freight train. But that's just what the archaeologists theorize. The truth is that 16 people died within seconds when the ship plunged into the ocean. Something happened on the ship that night to cause utter chaos, and we may never know exactly what it was. Number 2. The murder of Juan Prim. Juan Prim may have been strangled to death. He was a statesman who became the Prime Minister of Spain for a very brief bit of time. On December 28, 1870, a group ambushed and shot the Prime Minister. He was wounded but still alive, thanks to the carriage driver, who managed to continue on despite the ambush and get the injured Juan Prim to his house. Some accounts say he was so minorly injured that he walked into his house himself. Even when doctors came to operate, it didn't seem like he was in danger of dying. Yet 2 days later, the situation suddenly turned terrible. He fell into a delirium, and he died at 8:30. The cause of death was labeled sepsis, an infection caused by the projectile from the gun that ripped into him. But here's the bit that led to theories about strangulation. A new autopsy done in 2012 revealed that the real cause of death could have been, well, strangulation. This would mean that he survived the initial assassination attempt and then was strangled to death by someone in his inner circle. But this was 150 years ago, and we'll probably never be able to know for certain. Number 1. Mystery mob killing. Nobody knows who killed Benjamin Siegel. To his friends, he was Bugsy Siegel, an infamous mobster who was shot to death on June 20th, 1947. It happened in Southern California just 6 months after he opened the Flamingo Hotel and Casino with other mob affiliates in Las Vegas. The Flamingo is still open today at the exact same site, though there have been some serious refurbishments since the 1940s. Benjamin Siegel was staying at his girlfriend's house in Beverly Hills on the night of his death. It was about 10:45 at night, and a sniper armed with a military combine shot Benjamin through the window of the living room. At the time, Benjamin was reading the newspaper. He never even knew he was killed. 2 bullets went through his head and 2 went through his chest. One of the headshots was so intense that it blew his eye out, and it landed 15 feet away in the dining room. There's been a lot of speculation throughout the past 70-odd years as to who hired the hitman. Some say it was his childhood friend, Lansky, another mobster. It may have been that Benjamin had upset Lansky by constructing the Flamingo Casino. When the casino opened, there was a freak winter storm in Nevada. This caused a less than great opening, meaning some people may have lost some money and got very angry. But in the end, his assassin was never caught. Do you think any of these unsolved mysteries will ever be cleared? Let me know any theories you might have in the comments, and thanks for watching. If you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button for more awesome videos from the channel.